Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart checking in with our English 1152 poetry class here online. We're getting a little bit deeper into the course, kind of the point at which you are hopefully comfortable with the due date structure, with basic course navigation, you know, where to go to find things, how most of our units are set up, at least in a general sense, even if the assignments are a little bit different within each of those units. Just kind of that stuff, right? We want that to become almost like second nature, so you're really focusing on the course content and not the technology or the navigation piece to it. Pardon me. So it is actually Wednesday, sorry, Tuesday, September 24th as I'm recording this, so taking a quick look at our due dates here as we look at kind of the sonnet portion of our class. So we are just finishing up or heading towards finishing up our main due date for Unit 3, having that time to turn around and do replies, and recording this so you can sort of be looking ahead to Unit 4. As I've said before, I don't really think it behooves you to get too far ahead in the class. It often causes more problems than it solves. But, you know, being aware of due dates that are right around the corner is certainly beneficial. So getting in here a little bit earlier. So before I jump into the specific unit stuff here, which is actually fairly straightforward for this particular assignment, I wanted to provide a note about grading. Since we're deep enough into the class that you're starting to accumulate some grades, you can find those in your grade book here. So the first thing that I want to, I guess, point out and hope that you can internalize or always remember a little bit in terms of the grading like structure, but also sort of the larger philosophy for our class, is that it's out of 1,000 points, right? A nice round number. So it's easy for you to gauge sort of like how our course is built. There's no 500-point assignment that we do. There's no 300-point, 400-point. It's not built that way. Our class is built, as you're probably starting to discover here, on instead of just a couple of huge point assignments, which I feel are just like way too anxiety producing for people. Instead of that, it's built on lots of kind of like micro assignments, or the point value is much smaller. Maybe there's a couple of 100-point things that we do, but most of it is like 50 points, maybe 25 points. So out of the 1,000, it's always just a drop in the bucket. And that's what I want to kind of have you think about as you're starting to get grades back. So if you get, let's say, a 20 out of 25, a 40 out of 50, 45 out of 50, instead of letting your mind, which is what I would do, so I get it, letting your mind automatically calculate that as a percentage, as a letter grade, and now, oh no, I'm getting a whatever in this course, this is what I'm going to get. It really doesn't work like that. Like, our course is not designed to work like that. But I get that that's naturally where your brain would go. So instead of thinking about your 40 out of 50, let's say, as a low B and 80%, that's not what I want to be getting. It's really like the difference between a 40 out of 50, a 45 out of 50. So that's 5 points out of the whole scope of the 1,000 for our class. In other words, I can't parse out the difference for you between like a 42 and a 43 out of really even 50, let alone 1,000. So I tend to do these much more kind of accessible or like manageable 5-point increments. Remembering that like a 50 out of 50 is really for work that doesn't just meet the bare minimum, it goes way above and beyond. 45 out of 50, again, really great work. Maybe one thing could be developed a little bit more. 40 out of 50, usually pretty good, but maybe doesn't go the extra mile, or the replies are just kind of perfunctory, and then on down the scale. Further off the scale than that, you know, maybe we do have an issue to talk about. But I'm trying to encourage you not to get too anxious or worked up or concerned about like a 40 out of 50 versus a 45 out of 50. Always think in the big picture 1,000. So I guess the other part of that is that, you know, the late work policy, it needs to be fairly strictly enforced, especially like now as we're really into the course. There's no kind of excuses for not getting it anymore. And if I start making exceptions here and there and everywhere, the whole grading integrity of the thing just falls apart. And what seems fair to like one student is actually unfair to the other 25 or 30 that we have in the class. So I'm fairly stringent about the no late work policy because, you know, doing work on time is just a fundamental thing for our class, really for like any kind of work situation. You can't consistently arrive a day late to work, right? That's not going to happen. You get an F for fired. But having said all that, this is again sort of taking the big picture 1,000-point view. Regardless of what number the machine here, the Blackboard machine, mathematically spits out at the end of our term, I always look at your sort of row of grades. And instead of like 2 or 3, remember there's going to be lots of them. And this is again how I think this grading structure works in your favor. If you kind of like missed a unit, maybe you just forgot, right? Something happened. Or maybe you didn't do your best work. Maybe you misunderstood the directions. You didn't really spend much time on it. You can kind of be honest with yourself about that. But it's like a one-off thing, right? So I see that long row of grades, and they're all pretty good. Some of them are really good. You're kind of floating the ball up there, and then all of a sudden it dips, but you're right back to where you were before. I will, obviously like a normal human, look at that and exempt that one kind of like outlier grade, so it won't impact your overall, it won't impact your overall grade, and it certainly won't be a reflection of the work generally that you've put into the course. Having said that, the flip side is true. If missed work is a pattern, so I see pretty good work in a unit, missed a unit, pretty good work, missed, pretty good, missed, right? It's like a continuous thing that's popping up. That, of course, will have an effect on your grade. So again, try to not let your mind just calculate a one-off raw score for some of the things that we're doing, like a 25, 50-point assignment. Always imagine that bigger picture. And again, keeping in mind that if you kind of drop the ball once, it's not really going to impact you. But I don't change that now. I change that grade at the end of the term. So it is going to sort of sit there as a bit of a reminder, honestly, to you that you really have to keep your eye on the ball moving forward. Lots of ball metaphors going on here. So anyways, some big picture grading stuff to think about. But I will remind that it really is time that the due date structure is in place, and that's what it is. There's really can't be exceptions to that because you were confused or didn't get it. Like, there's lots of opportunities to have gotten it. Now, all of this is outside of like real traumatic life emergency things. That's a whole different category of thing that you can communicate with me about individually, and we can sort of figure out what's going on there. But again, bigger picture grading is the way to think of it, precisely because our course is built on lots of little microgrades adding up over time, not just a couple of big point assignments. Okay, so speaking of microgrades, let's jump into Unit 4. A little reminder again about our poetry event unit coming up. Still a little ways away, but useful to be thinking about that now so you're not scrambling at the last minute or attending something that really isn't a poetry event. We want this to be a fairly specific kind of thing you're going to. So we've done our sonnets unit here where we started them, and we're going to continue that for one more unit. Sonnets aren't everyone's favorite necessarily, but it is obviously a really important form, kind of the most recognizable form, I would say, in the world of poetry. It's not the oldest by any means, certainly not the most complicated, but it is important for us to be aware of this really preeminent form in poetry. Lots of poetry doesn't take form, right? That's a good thing to recognize too. So it's not like you even have to like sonnets per se. It's just being aware of them as part of the study in this course. Just like you take a history course, you become aware of things. It doesn't mean you like every event in history that you study. So a repeat from last unit, a reminder of the sonnet form, kind of broken down here. My little video that pays particular attention to iambic pentameter, the rhythmic device in sonnets. Again, because I think that is one of the most challenging parts of the form to get, the rules to follow. It's fairly easy to count 14 lines and figure that out. You can kind of get the rhyme scheme. You could see it visually. You could hear it. You can, what else? You could sort of understand the idea that this is the first quatrain is an introduction, like that. Here's the idea. Here's a couple of variations in these, what we could almost think of as paragraphs. They're quatrains, but imagine this is an essay. And then we wrap it up with a rhyming couplet or set of 2 lines here. All of that, I think, is fairly apprehensible. You can get it. It's the iambic pentameter that's much trickier. So again, a review, same video from last unit, but if you want to jump in there and find that spot, because your assignment this week is both really easy but also really hard. It's one that you could probably do in like a couple of minutes, honestly, but I don't think you'd really be getting much out of the course. I don't know that the work that you produce is going to be that great, so I'm hoping that you'll invest the time because like you're not just compelled to in some way, but sort of like self-motivated to. So all you're going to do is write a sonnet, right? Sounds easy. But especially for that iambic pentameter, that is really what I'm looking for. And unlike the sonnets that we read in Unit 3, which break the rules left, right, and center, we really want to produce sonnets that follow every rule to a T. It's almost artificial in the sense, but it's our way of like learning about the sonnet form. Not breaking the rules, but practicing the rules. Clearly we're going to do the English, like Shakespearean, Elizabethan sonnet here that's outlined and that I talk about in the video. So again, working in your portfolio page, embedding a Google Doc is, I feel like, the easiest thing to do. I'm not grading on how sort of profound your poem is. That's certainly interesting, like I care what you've written, but I'm really just looking for, have you followed the form? Have you followed the rules? And that's kind of where the time on task comes out. If you spent a couple minutes throwing something together, I doubt very much that it's going to follow all those rules. So you sort of lose points for that. Not because your poem isn't good as a poem. It's not good as a sonnet that should be following the rules. So again, really, really attending to the rules as they're laid out in the past unit, but also in this one too. You want to post your URL to our discussion board here, just like we've done in the past. If you embed a Google Doc or any sort of Google material, make extra sure that that is shared. So click the share button in your Google Doc and make sure that it's like people can view or even comment. If you just leave it as the default, then it's only going to be viewable by you, which means you embed it in your portfolio, you look at it, and because you're signed in as you, everything looks fine. But then we, because we're not signed in as you, we can maybe get to your portfolio, but that embedded document is just going to show up as like a blank space or a request access or you don't have permission kind of a thing. So double check that. So posting your updated portfolio with your sonnet. Remember, since we're on the web here, you could certainly add other stuff to that page if you want to kind of fancy it up a little bit. That would be cool to do. Visit as many as you want, but then use the reply function in Blackboard or in the Blackboard discussion board tool here to reply to at least 4. And again, we're not workshopping these or critiquing them really. We want to celebrate some creative choices, maybe make note of some formal things, especially if they're going right. Rhymes were really interesting. You seem to really follow the iambic pentameter. And again, a good discussion board post, or reply I should say, it doesn't just point that out, it provides an example. So that's a good example of where if I'm replying to a sonnet and I say, you really did a good job of the rhymes, they were really interesting. Okay, like a 40 out of 50 maybe. It's there, but it's not really doing a lot of work. If I then go on to provide a few examples, right, multiple examples, all of a sudden I'm kind of bumping that grade up, and again, those 5-point increments that I tend to work in, you're looking at more like the 45. Again, 5 points out of the whole 1,000, but building out replies is a really good way of upping your grade and building them out with that kind of level of specificity. Because what it does is it shows that you're really paying attention as you respond to the thing that you're responding to. You didn't just glance at it, have a kind of knee-jerk reaction, and then you're going to post that. Again, it's more like, is the work, whether it's a reply, a sonnet, or whatever, is it showing me or suggesting to me that you've really put some thought, effort, and time into what you're doing? That's again why I don't really look as a rule at the time that you're posting things, but if it's sort of not terrific work, it's just like barely meeting requirements, and I glance at the time and you're right up against the deadline, it's suggesting to me that you're not really spending much time on the class. And that's a problem, right? You know it is, I know it is, we don't need to belabor that point. Keep in mind too, 12-week class, you know, you'd be in class for a lot of hours every single week. So maybe you're not investing exactly precisely like by the clock that much at time, but it's certainly got to be more than like 10 or 15 minutes, half an hour before the due date for a thing. So kind of be honest with yourself about that. All right, so like I said, Unit 4 is actually fairly straightforward, but it could be fairly time consuming because you want to write a draft of your poem, kind of check it against the rules, make some changes, maybe even have someone else look at it if you want to do that. Again, it's really the application of the rules that I'm looking for in this, this particular assignment. Okay, so enjoy the beautiful weather that we're having, and if you have any questions or concerns, by all means, just be in touch with me.